Hey everyone, welcome back to Gratuity. I'm your host, Darin. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in, sent us a note, reached out. We really appreciate the support from the community. If you want to get involved, please email us at gratuity@tastemade.com. We are so excited to be joined by Grace Oedel, who is the Executive Director of the Northeast Organic Farming Association. We talk about the current state of organic farms, how they have had to pivot during the pandemic, and how this moment might be a catalyst for systematic changes to the farming community. It's a really inspiring and insightful conversation. There are some heavy moments, but there's also a lot of hope, and we hope that you enjoy it. So please sit back and enjoy some Gratuity. Grace, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, sitting down with us. We hope you and the family are doing well, and welcome to Gratuity.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
You work a lot directly with farmers, small farms in the Northeast, and now that we're about a month, 5 weeks into the global pandemic, I'd love to hear a little bit about what the daily life looks like for an organic farmer and small farms right now.
It's a really interesting question because it's really different farm to farm. So a lot of our farmers are experiencing record demand. We're seeing that the global supply chains aren't working as they usually have, and people are suddenly wanting their produce and their staples to come as locally as possible. And so some of our farms are experiencing 8 to 10 times the sort of orders that they typically get. A lot more CSAs fill up overnight on, as they've opened for the season. But other farms are totally decimated because they rely on U-pick labor. They don't have machinery to harvest their crops, and they are based on an agritourism business, or they sell their food to UVM. Here in Vermont is a huge buyer of food, the colleges, and they're not in session. So where does that produce go? It looks really different depending on where you are. And our work right now is a lot about trying to mitigate the very real harm that's happening to frontline communities, farmers, farm workers. All this category of essential workers are really on the line for all of our health right now. And a lot of people, don't qualify for the programs that have been put out by the stimulus package for a number of reasons. We need to stand together and mitigate this harm. And at the same time, we really need to be thinking about how can we use this moment to move towards the food system that will really feed us in the future. We're trying to hold both, that this is a moment of change. And anytime there's a really disruptive change, there's the potential to come in with really durable systems that could serve us better than the ones that we have. But at the same time, there's a lot of suffering happening right now. So we have to hold both.
There's no surprise that there are systemic issues with the farm system in America, both on a small and large level. It's been documented, it's been talked about, and obviously something like this is not a small disruption or change in the way people approach life, but this really, really shines the spotlight on how hard it is to be a modern day farmer. And it'd be great if you give some additional background that what life looked like for organic farms pre-pandemic. What were people dealing with? What were some of the struggles that have just been blown to the extremes right now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're seeing across the board in this pandemic time is that people who are living close to the margins have gotten hit first and worst, and that's no different in the farming community. All the systems that are brittle have only been made more so. So none of the situations that we're looking at are new. We have systemic sort of marginalization of certain categories of people. We have, extreme poverty and racist systems that persist in this country. And so that is also at play in farming and agriculture. Farmers who really are the basis of our life, who work with the land to sustain us all, really live close to the margins. If they make enough to survive as farmers, that is a win. Wow. We have seen an extreme consolidation of, just like in any sector, where more corporations control a lot of the food system. And that's from distribution, retail, all the way through. So small and mid-sized farms, who are a lot of our farms, have a tough time making it work. Even if they're getting a premium for growing organic food, it's still, hard to make a living. And so it's an additional test on those systems. But what we're also seeing, which is really hopeful, is that there's so much need, and suddenly people who may or may not think about food all the time for their work are suddenly aware of how much they're in a relationship with the people who grow their food. So you see people starting to talk about farmers as heroes and frontline workers, and feel a lot of gratitude to their farmer, and to start thinking about where does my food chain start, and also talk about a lot of the food in this country is picked by farm workers who may or may not have legal protections in this country. And suddenly we're realizing, wow, a lot of the food that we eat every day relies on our relationship with those people too. So we're seeing, all of that come to the fore in more people's minds right now. And farmers are in general, an extremely innovative group, especially, the small and mid-sized farmers who have to pivot all the time. Their work is weather reliant. So you're constantly coming up with new challenges and opportunities, and they're developing their own technologies, and they're all doing it on a crazy shoestring budget. So this kind of moment, we had farmers markets shut down here in the state for several weeks. And now we've heard that those markets will reopen, but in a very different way. And so farmers have already built new distribution platforms, gone to entirely online ordering, partnered up with regional farmers, and distributed door to people's doors. So they're figuring it out and adjusting, because that's what they do always.
They're maybe the original problem solvers, for as long as we can go back, of just what it means to really get food out of the crops. In so many situations where people could say, you'll never grow anything, you can never get anything out of there, how do you adjust? It's inspiring. It really is inspiring to see the way that these people who realize that people need to get fed are helping feed those people who may have never thought about them before 6 weeks ago.
Totally. Yeah. We were talking together about dairy farmers a little bit, who are experiencing a somewhat different set of problems, because they are in co-ops primarily. So Organic Valley, Stonyfield, these larger brands that we recognize are actually cooperatives of small farmers who ship their milk together. So there's a bulk tank that comes and picks up the milk, it's processed into yogurt or whatever the product is, or kept as fluid milk, and it's sold in a grocery store. So it's harder to figure out how to change your distribution stream if you're a dairy farmer. Of course, there are some very small scale dairies or dairies who bottle themselves, but here in Vermont, we have a lot of dairy farming happening, and we see that dairy farms are being impacted, a lot right now. So we're concerned about that, and not in the organic sector yet, but there is a little bit of milk dumping that has happened already here in Vermont with demand down. We feel like, again, that's a situation where dairy farmers have been extremely marginal for years. The cost of production of milk has been higher than what the milk price that they're paid for that milk is. So farmers have hung on for 5 years with those costs being out of balance, and they were hoping for a rebound this year, and that seems to be not coming. So again, we're looking at how can we support these farmers who are stewarding a lot of our land, and our organic farmers who are a little bit insulated from that initial price hit, but long term, what will this do to demand for dairy? We don't quite yet know.
Yeah, I think it would help for people to understand that there are essentially two different supply chains in America, the commercial and the consumer, because you are seeing these juxtapositions of milk dumping or burying 1 million pounds of onions, potatoes, and things like that. So all this food that can't be used, and then also empty shelves at the supermarket. If you could explain the two different supply chains and why it's tough for the commercial to go to the consumer, I think that'll give people a better idea of what the real struggle is, not just for the situation, but in the larger idea of American distribution when it comes to ingredients and groceries and farm goods.
I think that's a good distinction. It is confusing to read these articles about so much food waste at a time when people are so food insecure. So a lot of the food that's bought in this country is institutionally going to institutions like schools or hospitals or any of these larger buyers. So when you see colleges across the board shut down, schools shut down, actually school meals have been a real bright spot in this,
Yeah.
at least here in Vermont. The school meals professionals have absolutely pivoted to convert, like, so they're distributing food along bus routes so that food insecure families are getting 2 meals a day brought to their door. And we know that for a lot of these kids and families, this is like the most whole meal that they're going to get all day. And here in Vermont, that's been expanded universally. So anyone who's under 18 can get that. There's no questions. You know, you don't have to be within a school. So that's a really exciting thing to see. We have the system. We have people driving the buses. We have these people making the food. We have the farmers lined up to get the food to those schools. Let's imagine a different way, and let's get that food to those who need it and continue supporting the farmers. So I feel really heartened by that work.
Yeah.
And grateful to those people who are out there on the front lines feeding our kids every day. But a lot of the food in this country is destined for these larger buyers, and it's not packaged in ways that consumers are used to it. And we don't have storage facilities in every town. We don't have processors in every town. So we can't just decide, you know, why don't we just process our own cream cheese here in wherever we are? We don't have that, you know, processing facility. We've gotten to a scale where we need to move product and process it elsewhere or package it elsewhere. And so one of the things that's really going to come about through this is the return of this conversation about localism. What is the regional scale that's appropriate for us to really feel safe and in relationship? One of the things that's amazing to see with these small and mid-sized farmers is there's deep relationship between the consumers and the providers of food. So they know this is what this farm has to offer. I know that farmer knows another farmer who has a complementary product. They're going to team up, and then they're going to get to every person who needs to be fed's house. You know, it's just at a very human scale when it's appropriately sized. But under sort of the last 50, 70 years of agriculture in America, starting with, you know, Secretary Earl Butz, who was the ag secretary who promoted this idea of get big or get out. And we hear that echoed still now with Secretary Perdue, who has reiterated that recently about when small family scale dairy farms can't survive, you know, well, scale up. And we're seeing now that doesn't serve. It doesn't serve the farmer. What it makes is a system of farming that's reliant on a lot of debt, a lot of machinery, and a real resource extraction from the land. And it doesn't nourish that farmer's livelihood, ultimately. It puts every other farmer out of business, and it doesn't really work for the eater either, and ultimately our land base. So what I hope we can do is think again about sort of appropriate scale. Where can we invest in relationships directly in our communities in ways that allow us to feel like we can be resilient? And when there's the next crisis, maybe it's a flood, or maybe it's, you know, these things happen, and under a time of climate change, they will happen increasingly. How can we be ready for that? So that's like one of the things we're really trying to figure out. What does it look like to be resilient? How do we build those food hubs to distribute on a regional scale? And what are ways that we can do that are inclusive, that are accessible to all eaters? So you don't have to have a local foods movement that's only for the elite. We're talking about how can we make farmers markets accessible? And one of our big projects is we can't go to all online delivery and ordering right now because it's illegal to use SNAP benefits that way unless you have a waiver. And most states don't. So we are really committed to ensuring that farm stands have EBT machines and farmers markets remain available to people using these programs that can leverage their buying power. So we see this as a movement for everyone, for small farmers and for eaters of all economic levels.
You know, you bring up a good point about economic levels, because one of the arguments has been that organic farm to table is only for a very small, wealthy part of the eating class. And it is not scalable if you're paying X amount of dollars for organic carrots when you're trying to work off a budget, or you're working off, you know, food stamps or things like that. But if it was to scale locally in a way that you could have enough people who buy these types of groceries and you had direct from farm to consumer supply chains, could you get those prices down? Could you get it to a point where everyone could afford to buy fresh, local, seasonal ingredients?
That is a really important question for the organic food movement to sit with. And what I would answer is that the food that is affordable in our grocery stores is not affordable in the expanded sense. It is highly, highly subsidized, and we pay for that in our tax money. And so we're paying for it, and then we're paying for it doubly through our healthcare system. And the government is, it's a product of big agriculture having a lot of money to lobby. But it's not the case that it's actually cheaper to produce this kind of food that's more resource intensive actually and relies on a lot of inputs. Furthermore, what organic agriculture does is it really harnesses these externalities that are not accounted for in conventional ag, which is to say, it's organic agriculture, organic practices, whether or not you're certified. If you're doing stewardship practices, you are keeping carbon in the soil, you're cleaning the water, you are promoting biodiversity on your farm, you are doing these ecosystem services that I think we're starting to understand have a value to society. But for sure, this cannot be a conversation about individual choice, because it's not about like everybody just needs to understand this and invest in their food, because most people under the system are living paycheck to paycheck. That's another thing we're learning in COVID. Yeah. Most people do not have money in the bank to like be okay for 2 months without their paycheck, right? Yeah. So we can't say like just invest it now. What we need to say is like we need a systemic overhaul where we look holistically at the health of our land, the health of our farmers and eaters, and then we use our tax money to ensure public good. That's what government's for. So, we need a massive education effort and engagement effort there. But I do think that the local food movement needs to be a movement for everyone if we're going to be going, into the next 50 years. Here in Vermont, we have a lot of folks who work, farm workers on dairy farms who themselves are food insecure. A lot of them feel that they can't leave dairy farms because they're under persecution of ICE. They don't have legal protections. And what that engenders is a situation where the people who are producing the most nutritive food for the country themselves do not have access to that food. So there's an issue there, and we need to look at that as a country and say we can do better. One of the things that makes me feel really, really heartened in this time is to see how when we have shared purpose and collective intention to do something together, the whole world can change really fast.
Yeah, the community, both local, national, international, it is inspiring to see when there is really life and our future on the line, that certain people can get together, if not all people, and be like, okay, well, we're in this. We got to make some changes.
Totally.
You bring up a good point about the workforce and the labor force who tend to a lot of these farms, and immigration policy, which has been in constant conversation. In fact, this week there is a new ban on immigration, holding on green cards and things like that. That directly affects farms and the people who work on it. Would you be able to shine a little bit of a spotlight on, how the people who work the farms, who tend the farms, are being affected right now, and what a shortage of labor means to the farms as we head into the spring, into the summer?
The reality is, on the majority of farms who are producing at large scale do rely on labor from people who come here from other countries. The idea that we want to villainize people trying to migrate here who are trying to do the work that we all need to be sustained, literally, is ludicrous. My hope is that we can see some movement there. What we've seen the president do is actually allow H-2A programs to remain similar to previous years, although there's been a lot of concern about, well, will that happen or not? The H-2A program is an immigration visa that allows overseas workers to come to work on harvesting, or working for a specific agricultural season. So that's like a program that will be allowed, although other, as you noted, the halting on issuing green cards. So there's a huge systemic issue here where we really are in intimate relationship with the people who are feeding us. Right. And yet we don't want to see these people, or the current administration is talking about these people as if they are coming to take advantage of the country. So my hope is that this can really help illuminate to all of us, like that narrative really doesn't work. It's not the case, and to show that we really are in deep relationship with one another is super important.
A lot of people, when they think of farms, they might think of California or, other parts of the country, but the Northeast and especially Vermont does put up a lot of goods for the country. It's, dairy, as you mentioned, things like that. The organization that you're a part of, the Northeast Organic Farming Association, has been doing a lot of work with these farmers, not just, now, but leading up to it. But what are you doing right now to help people? I know that you have the Farmer Emergency Fund, but I'd love to hear about the work that you are doing and maybe share some tips that if other people are thinking about getting involved or other organizations similar to yours, how can they get the ball rolling and help the community that you support or that they support?
So thanks for that question. We have been around as an association for 50 years and we're coming up on our 50th. So this feels like a real illuminating moment about what's our next 50 years of work about. And we really see it as about this question of resilience. How can we be even more resilient and in deep relationship at the core of our food system? How can we make this a local and regional food system that values people and planet over profit happen? We have a number of projects running right now in service to that goal. The long view is that under climate change, we really need farmers to be stewarding our land for us. And we need farmers who are very skilled at working with changing weather patterns, doing work to get carbon out of the air and into the soil, cleaning our water. These are just crucially needed skills. And we have experts in our movement, in this organic and regenerative farming movement. So one thing we want to see is more farms adopting those practices, states incentivizing those practices in the long term. That will be really helpful. We see a need for more folks to be tending land, and we're helping, we're in service to that goal in a number of ways. But one of the things, we have beginning farmer programs, we have training programs, we have technical assistance, farm services team, we have a market development team. We have a number of ways to sort of grow the organic movement and the small and mid-sized farming movement. Right now, under COVID, we're doing a number of efforts. You mentioned that we have a Farmer Emergency Fund where we're providing mini loans to farms who are experiencing crisis, or we're actually adding a program right now of resilience grants that are proactive to help farms increase production or move their type of distribution model or really innovate right now to be able to get to where they need to be to keep the people of New England fed. In the first round of stimulus, farms were omitted from the EIDL, the disaster loan program that gave a lot of small businesses $10,000 grants. Farmers were excluded from. And so we're trying to inject some of that capital ourselves and through philanthropic partnerships. And now it looks like in the second round, we're hearing that farmers will be included. So that's the result of some, big coalition work. What we are also doing is we have piloted this dairy worker relief program. So one of the things we were hearing is from the smaller farms, a lot of our organic dairies are two-person operations. They're like a family. They're not hugely staffed. We were hearing, we're scared. What if one of us gets sick? We can't sustain the farm for 2 weeks. Even if we could, we don't know who could come in and cover for us. And then if that happened, would our budget just be totally ruined? These people are farming. It's just totally breaking even. So we developed a dairy relief milker database, and we now have people in every county who have dairy experience.
Wow.
And can step in when people get sick. And we are also covering farm workers who get sick. So we're basically modeling these things that we want to see on the larger, which is farms need access to capital to respond right now. And farmers and farm workers need to be able to take paid sick time. They need these protections like any other category of worker. So we will actually cover the cost of a relief milker so that a worker may be paid through the period We're also fighting for policy change on that level too. We have a program called Farm Share, which is, to your earlier point about, is this accessible for all? It's a subsidized CSA program. So it's basically gets food to people who need it, lower income Vermonters, and it helps farm viability. So it's like matchmaking, so that we can develop these networks here in state and in the region. We're helping farmers figure out how to distribute locally and how to get their product up online and how to work with food hubs to matchmake. So there's a whole lot of really exciting work. We're working in partnership with the university on delivering telehealth services. They have these awesome programs where like you can talk to a doctor if you're remote over the tablet. And then we're working with a lot of the farm worker organizing community to ensure that farm workers know of these programs too. So like try to be in as a team.
Yeah.
And really say we're all in this together. How do we figure this out together? And our farmers are modeling that better than I think like any other leadership group in the country, where they're like, we have got to just get together, pool our products, support each other, show up, and model that this is possible. So
I mean, that's incredible, the amount of work that you have not only been doing, but have been able to get off the ground. There's a lot of heavy stuff we just talked about, and it's a little scary out there, but there's also a lot of hope. There is a lot of good that I think will come out of this. And we touched on a little bit of a silver lining, but if there's one thing that you hope to see of all the things, what is the silver lining in this situation? What do you hope on the other side we come out stronger as a nation, as a community, as people who support farms?
I hope that we come out of this really understanding that farmers feed us all, and investing in our relationships with our farmers, and showing up as people for systems in general that are centered on people and planet, and really sustainable, durable systems in the long term. So they aren't brittle. And we can say, something could happen. We could still figure out a way forward because we're in relationship with each other, and we're doing that in a way that is, in appropriate scale of consumption with our earth. And I think that this is a great test for us to figure out how to do that, and how to care for each other, even in really challenging times. And like we said before, people are doing that. People are really showing how brave they are and how willing they are to sacrifice, and pulling together in ways that they've never done before. They're innovating, and that feels extremely positive to me. It's a hard time, but it's also a time of a lot of introspection for us all, and clarification about what really matters. So my hope is that we move forward with that knowledge about like, what do we really need? And how do we now invest in systems that move us towards that more durably and for everyone?
Amazing. Well, Grace, thank you so much.
Thanks for spending the time.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are doing amazing work. And if people want to get involved or get some tips, because I know that you have a bunch of really good resources that apply beyond just Vermont, where can they go? Where can people follow along and get involved?
Yeah, we're at NOFA, NOFAVT.org, or you can Google the Northeast Organic Farming Association and you will find us. Thank
you so much. We really appreciate taking the time, all the work you're doing to support farms. And I, for one, am looking forward to getting back to the farmers markets when they open up here in LA in just a little bit. And so thank you. And
thank you.
Stay safe, well. And we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye. Grace, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down and chat with us. We really appreciate all the work that you are doing along with NOFA Vermont. If you want to get involved or you want to learn more about how you can help your local farm community, please check out the link in the description below. If you want to reach out to us, please drop us a line at gratuity@tastemade.com. And thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.